In this session, I will discuss with you the Mundel-Flemming model, which is a quite a old model, but very vital to discuss the implication of monetary and fiscal policy for a small open economy. And the Mundel-Flemming model, the model The Mundel-Flemming model is otherwise known as the application of ISLM model in an open economy. Now we know that the IS and LM model depicted the relationship between interest rate and GDP in a closed economy, and the IS curve represented the equilibrium in the goods market, the LM curve represented the equilibrium in the money market. Now in the open economy, the key variable that we are interested is exchange rate. Specifically, we want to know the different combination of exchange rate and GDP so that the goods market is in equilibrium and the money market is in equilibrium. So we want a relationship between exchange rate and GDP, and E is the nominal exchange rate, which is we have already defined as number of units of foreign currency I can get per unit of rupee. So it is dollars per unit of rupee. Though we generally express in the exchange rate as rupees 75 equal to $1, we will here express the exchange rate as rupee 1 is equal to dollar 1 by 75. That means how many units of foreign currency I can get per unit of rupee. So in the Mundel-Flemming model, we will see how exchange rate and GDP are related when the goods market is in equilibrium. And if you recall, the IS curve was represented when Y was equal to C plus I plus G, which represented goods market equilibrium in a closed economy. Now in an open economy, we are saying we will include the X minus M term. And where does exchange rate fit in? We know that when exchange rate appreciates, exports are discouraged and imports get a boost, so my net exports, they drop. Okay, so initially if the economy's exchange rate was E1, corresponding to it the net exports were at particular level of say NX1. So when E1 was the exchange rate, net exports were NX1. So Y was equal to C plus I plus G plus NX1. So this is the Y, Y1, which is taking into account NX1 net exports. Now suppose the exchange rate appreciates to E2, we are saying net exports, so Y1 was C plus I plus G plus NX1, Y2 will be C plus I plus G plus NX2, and because NX2 is less than NX1, because exchange rate has appreciated, Y2 will be less than Y1. So my Y2 will be Y2 is less than Y1, and so this is another combination YE2 and Y2, so that we are finding the goods market is in equilibrium. The goods market equilibrium is represented through y is equal to c plus I plus g plus nx. So when I join the 2 points, I get the IS curve. Okay, and as far as the LM curve is concerned, we know that the LM curve was upward sloping in a closed economy model. Now in an open economy, what is happening, we are we are considering a situation of a small open economy. So in a small open economy, the characteristic is such that the interest rate that will prevail in this economy will be equal to the interest rate prevailing in the rest of the world. Why is this? Suppose in the rest of the world the interest rate is 6%, the interest rate that will prevail in this economy is also 6%. Why? Because we are assuming there is perfect mobility of capital. So in the domestic economy, if the interest rate is say 8%, what will happen? There will be capital inflow, and this capital inflow will increase the supply of loanable funds in the domestic economy, and demand for loanable funds remaining what it is. With the increase in supply, interest rates will come down to 6%. And if the domestic interest rate is less than the world interest rate, say 4%, then there will be capital outflow from the domestic economy to the rest of the world to take advantage of the interest rate differential. Now that will lead to a situation where there will be a shortage of loanable funds in the domestic economy, and demand for loanable funds remaining what it was. The decrease in supply of loanable funds in the domestic economy will cause the domestic interest rates to go up, and this process will continue till the interest rate in the domestic economy is again 6%, which is the world interest rate. So the key thing is, for a small open economy, R, the domestic economy's interest rate will be equal to R star. And if R is equal to R star, in the LM curve, which was a combination of, the LM curve was different combinations of interest rate and GDP. Now we are saying R is equal to R star, which is the world interest rate. Now at R star, the output that will be consistent is say Y star, or say Y star is equal to Y1, and R is suppose equal to R1. So what we are saying, in the domestic economy, the interest rate that will prevail is R1, and corresponding to that the output that will be prevailing is Y1. So if I plot exchange rate and GDP, I will find uh, what? I will find the LM curve will look like a vertical line, and this vertical line is vertical at GDP level of Y1, and this Y1 is corresponding to the interest rate in the domestic economy, which is equal to the interest rate that will prevail in the, or that is prevailing in the rest of the world. Okay, so because my LM curve was telling me equality between money demand and money supply, so given the money supply and the money demand, the interest rate which will bring about equality between money demand and money supply, which is R1, is equal to the world interest rate, and that is corresponding to output level Y1. So the my LM curve is a vertical line, is vertical irrespective of the exchange rate, because the output that will be consistent with the world interest rate is in the domestic economy is y1. Now, given my IS curve, which was downward sloping, and we are now plotting the relationship between exchange rate and GDP, and the LM curve is vertical at say y1 level of GDP, and y1 is corresponding to a world interest rate of say R1. Okay, so my IS curve is downward sloping, the LM curve is vertical. So the equilibrium exchange rate that will prevail in this economy is E star, and the GDP that will prevail in this economy is Y1, and at E star Y1 combination I am finding the goods market and the money market both are in equilibrium. Now we want to see the effectiveness of fiscal policy and monetary policy in the Mundel-Flemming model, and we will consider two alternate exchange rate systems. One is the flexible exchange rate system, and the other is the fixed exchange rate system. Now, in the flexible exchange rate system, the central bank does not intervene in the forex market to keep the interest rate at a pre-announced level. Rather, the exchange rate fluctuates depending on the demand for and supply of domestic currency vis-a-vis the foreign currency in the foreign exchange market. And how exchange rates are decided, we have already discussed it in session 8. So we are considering three things. One is the impact of a fiscal policy, the impact of monetary policy, and the impact of fiscal, monetary, and the impact of trade policy on GDP and exchange rate through the Mundel-Flemming model. So let us consider initially the economy was at this kind of a IS curve, and the LM curve was looking like this. So it was IS1 and LM1. Now when government spending increases, or suppose there is an expansionary fiscal policy, the IS curve will shift to the right to IS2. That means now what will happen is this policy effective, and we have already discussed, to assess the effectiveness of policy you have to see what is going to happen to the GDP, okay, which is Y. Now in this case we are finding what is happening. The GDP level, suppose initially the exchange rate was E1 and the GDP level was Y1. Because of this expansionary fiscal policy, the exchange rate is appreciating to Y2, but GDP is still maintained at Y1. And why is this so? Why fiscal policy is not able to influence GDP? A mechanical answer is because the LM curve is vertical. A change in the IS curve will not bring about a change in Y. Now, but what is the intuition? The intuition is when government spending increases, output will have a tendency to increase. Okay, when government spending increases, output will have a tendency to increase, which increases the demand for money in the economy. Supply of money remaining as it is, what happens? Interest rate goes up, and to take advantage of this higher interest rate in the domestic economy, there is capital inflow. Okay, capital inflow to the domestic economy, which leads to an appreciation of the exchange rate. I hope you recall how exchange rate is decided. Now exchange rate was decided, just to recap, this is rupee traded. Okay, and here we had put demand for rupee, and this was my supply of rupee. This was dollars per unit of rupee. So as I go up, the y-axis the exchange rate is appreciating. Now, who is demanding rupee? People who want to buy Indian goods or Indian bonds and equities. Now, when we say interest rate goes up, that leads to a situation where foreign investors would like to buy more of Indian financial instruments because now they are giving higher return. So they would like to convert their dollars into rupees, which will cause the demand for rupee curve to shift to DR1, so that my exchange rate, which was E1, will go up to E2. It is going up. Now that is what is represented here. E goes up. This leads to what? Exports getting a dampening impact and imports getting a boost, because now I can buy the same amount of foreign goods with lesser rupees. So this will lead to a situation where my net exports will go down, and because my net exports goes down, what I am finding, the increase in government spending, because y was equal to c plus I plus g plus nx, so the increase in g is negated by a decrease in net exports, so that y remains unaltered. And y is remaining unaltered and the fall in nx is matching the increase in g, because nothing had changed in the money market. Money supply has not increased or decreased, so the domestic interest rate, nothing has changed, and it is still equated with the world interest rate, and that corresponds to only one level of GDP, which is Y1. So the fall in NX will be to an extent which completely negates the expansionary impact of fiscal policy. So in this case, what we are saying, the net exports are crowding out the increase in government spending. In the closed economic case, we had said when government spending increases, interest rate goes up, and that was leading to a drop in investment. So government spending was crowding out private investment. In the open economic case, we are saying government spending is crowding out net exports. And why this is happening? Because my exchange rate is appreciating. You could see it is moving up from E1 to E2. I hope this is now clear. Now let us look at what happens when the money supply increases in a small open economy. And what is happening? This is my IS curve. This was the LM curve. This is IS1 and LM1. So what I am getting, when money supply increases, what would happen? The interest rate in the economy, when money supply is increasing, what happens in the domestic economy? Interest rates will have a tendency to fall, or but we know that in a small open economy, interest rate will not be allowed to fall. So what happens then? My money supply, which has increased, my money demand should also increase, so that the equilibrium is maintained at the old R star level. Okay, and money demand, we know, is a function of income. Okay, the transaction and the non-transaction demand for money. The transaction demand for money depended on income. So if my money demand is to increase so as to match the money supply, my income level must increase. That means the LM curve must now correspond to a higher level of GDP, so that at Y2 the money demand is MD2, which is equal to the money supply 2 is equal to MD2. So money supply initially increases from MS1 to MS2. MS1 increases to MS2, and earlier it used to be MD1. that again increases to MD2. So and this increase in money demand is coming from a higher level of GDP. So when money supply increases, the LM curve will shift to the right. Okay. Now what is happening to, is this policy effective? Now if you see, the exchange rate has depreciated from E1 to E2, and output level has gone up. Why output level has gone up? Because when interest rate has a tendency to go down, that will lead to domestic savers putting their money outside India. So it will be a capital, there will be a capital outflow, and this capital outflow will cause the exchange rate to depreciate, and this drop in exchange rate will give a boost to export and will dampen imports, so that the net exports will increase. So Y, which is incorporating net exports, is getting a boost. Okay, so Y is increasing from Y1 to Y2. So what we have found, that in a small open economy, when money supply is increased, it is leading to a exchange rate depreciation, which causes a spurt in net exports, which acts as a positive impetus to the GDP. So we have just discussed fiscal policy is ineffective, because in case of fiscal policy, we just saw that output does not change when money supply is when government is increasing spending. But in the case of monetary expansion, or when monetary policy is used to give a boost to the economy, it is quite effective, because the exchange rate is depreciating, and which is giving a boost to the GDP. When money supply is increasing, exchange rate is depreciating, which is giving a boost to GDP. Now let us consider another policy which is often talked about in the media, and mostly political representatives often talk of this policy, which is very catchy, which is called as the trade policy. Okay, trade policy, what the government or the policymakers want to say is, they want to counter the trade deficit by restricting imports. Okay, they they talk about restricting imports to correct the trade deficit. Now whether this will work and how effective is this policy, so let us try to see. What they are trying to say is, initially the economy was having a IS curve of IS1 and a LM curve of LM1. What they are this policy, what it tries, by trade deficit, which is equal to export minus imports. So they are saying we are not able to do much about exports, so why not reduce imports or restrict imports, so that trade deficit is reduced. Now export minus imports, so once a restriction on imports is imposed, x minus m initially will go up. Okay, so my y, which is equal to c plus I plus g plus x minus m, will tend to increase. Okay, so what would happen, the IS curve, so at the old exchange rate, now my GDP is increasing, which I am representing as a shift in the IS curve. This is representing at the old exchange rate, Y1 is now corresponding to a higher level of GDP, so the IS curve is shifting. But in the ultimate analysis, given the LM curve, is it leading to a higher GDP? We are finding, because the LM curve is vertical, A shift in the IS curve is not leading to any change in GDP. GDP is stuck at Y1. Why is it so? Because if you see, if imports are restricted for some time, export minus import goes up. Now when export minus import goes up, because importers are not allowed to import as much, there is, in the foreign exchange market, what is happening, less rupees are offered for conversion into dollars. So in the foreign exchange market, the demand for rupee, and this was the supply of rupee, what was, what is happening, because now imports are restricted, people are not allowed to import as much, so the supply of rupee in the foreign exchange market for conversion into dollars to make imports is now reduced. So SR becomes SR1, the supply of rupee curve 1. What it does, it leads to the exchange rate moving up from E1 to E2. That is, now less rupee is traded. Okay, this was rupee traded. So what is happening, rupee traded falls and the exchange rate appreciates, and this exchange rate appreciation is depicted in the ISLM framework as movement from E1 to E2. Now this, when E goes up, it leads to what, a drop in exports, and you have already restricted imports. Okay, and that is why M is going down. So what is happening now, NX will go down. In other words, the drop in exports on account of exchange rate appreciation will negate the benefit that you are getting from import restriction. Now, what is happening in the process, and why the negation will be just equal to the drop in the imports? Because nothing has changed in the money market, because the world interest rate has not changed, and the domestic interest rate is equal to the world interest rate, so the output level remains the same. And only if the exports decline to the extent that imports have been restricted, we will find that output is at the old level. Now what has happened, imports have fallen, exports have fallen, so the trade volume, the overall trade volume will be now less. Trade volume goes down. Now we know that trade leads to welfare enhancement. Now because of lesser trade, you would find that welfare on account of trade is also relatively less. So what is happening, for some time my import substitution industries may be gaining, but this gain is coming at the expense of the export industries, because the exports are getting adversely impacted. So what one may be coming across is sectoral shifts, some industries losing their importance and some industries gaining importance because of this trade policy of restricting imports, but the net impact is output doesn't change, and maybe with lesser trade there is less welfare for this economy, and of course it creates more problems like sectoral shifts that we just discussed. Now we will discuss the effectiveness of monetary and fiscal policy in the context of Mundel-Fleming model, when the exchange rate adopted in the economy is a fixed exchange rate system. In a fixed exchange rate system, the central bank remains committed to buy and sell the domestic currency for the foreign currency at the predefined exchange rate. Okay, so if we are saying that suppose the central bank has decided or pre-announced that the exchange rate of rupee versus dollar will be rupees 50 will be equal to $1, which other words means rupee 1 is equal to 0.02 dollars. So if this is the scenario we are beginning with, and maybe for some reason we are finding for some reason the demand for uh, and supply of the domestic currency in the foreign exchange market is such that the exchange rate is not at $1 equal to 50. What will happen? This is the demand for rupee, this is the supply of rupee, and suppose the central bank has announced that it will be what, 0.02 or 50, this is dollar per units of rupee, say, and as we go up it is that the rupee is appreciating, and when we go down along the y-axis the rupee is depreciating. If for some reason the exchange rate is at, say, 40 rupees per dollar, what is it, we are getting $1 equal to rupees 40. In other words, the rupee is appreciated. Okay, you are getting $0.025 instead of $0.02. Now what will happen? The central bank is remaining committed to give 50 rupees, so I will uh, take 40 rupees, buy $1 from the market, and sell this $1 to the central bank to get 50 rupees, so that I would have made 10 rupees profit in the process. Now what is happening when I am um, when I am giving dollars to the central bank and getting rupees, the money supply in the economy is increasing, and which causes the supply of rupee in the domestic economy to increase. Suppose we found ourselves to begin with at 0.025. Okay, now at 0.025 my supply of rupee would have been what? My supply of rupee would have been SR1. Okay, and if the rupee was appreciated because there was less rupees in the foreign exchange market for conversion into dollar, now this situation is rectified through an increase in the supply of rupee, because people are buying dollars from the market and selling the dollar into the to the central bank, and in the process money supply is increasing. So I am getting what, if rupee is appreciated, what it would lead to, then it will lead to action by arbitrageurs, action by arbitrageurs to increase the money supply in the economy, and in the process and in the process the exchange rate settles at the predefined rate. In other words, we are saying arbitrage opportunities are there as long as the market exchange rate deviates from the pre-announced exchange rate. We can consider the reverse situation. Suppose for some reason the rupee is depreciated and it is selling at 60 rupees per dollar in the market. What it is telling that rupee 1 is equal to now 0.016, okay, approximately $0.016. Now what this will uh, lead to? It will lead to a situation when people will take 50 rupees and get a dollar from the people will give 50 rupees to the central bank, get $1 from the central bank, and will sell this $1 in the market to get 60 rupees. Okay, so in the process what happens, the money supply, that means more money is going back to the central bank, and in the process the money supply in the economy is declining. And that means in terms of our diagram, suppose it was at 0.016. So what we are saying, this depreciation will prompt arbitrageurs to buy dollars from the central bank by giving 50 rupees and selling that same dollar in the market for 60 rupees, and to have made 10 rupees profit in the process. But as more money is getting deposited with the central bank to make profits, the money supply in the economy is getting reduced. And the decline in money supply, suppose that means the initially, suppose there was excess of rupee in the market, and now as more money gets deposited in the central bank, the supply of rupee curve shifts to the left, and it leads to money supply in the economy to decrease. But this process will continue till the market exchange rate equates with the pre-announced exchange rate. And why we are saying that the money supply decreases? Because the money supply is in the control of the central bank. As more money gets deposited with the central bank, the currency in circulation drops or the money supply falls. Now we would see how monetary and fiscal policy works in a fixed exchange rate system. And to appreciate that, let us start with fiscal policy. And it is now a fixed exchange rate system. So initially the IS curve was like this, and the LM curve was like this. And suppose government wants to increase spending, that causes what? That causes the IS curve to shift to IS1, okay, and which leads to an appreciation of the currency. Now because the central bank is committed to keep the exchange rate at the, suppose E1 was the pre-decided exchange rate, then what will happen? Because the currency is getting appreciated, the arbitrages action will lead to an increase in money supply in the economy. This we have already discussed. So what happens? The money supply will increase to such an extent till the market exchange rate meets or it again reaches the pre-decided exchange rate. That means first LM curve will shift to LM1, but at LM1 still the rupee is appreciated, so the curve will shift further to LM2 only when you are operating at LM2. That means money supply has increased so much that the new exchange rate or market determined exchange rate again converges to the pre-decided exchange rate. Then only there will be no more arbitrage opportunities. Now in the process, what has happened, the initial equilibrium GDP, which was Y1, has increased to Y2, and we are saying E2 again falls back to E1. So in the flexible exchange rate system, because the exchange rate was free to move, we were finding that fiscal policy was ineffective, because as the IS curve shifts to IS1, the exchange rate appreciates and that dampens net exports so that Y doesn't change. But in a fixed exchange rate, because the central bank is committed to buy and sell foreign currency at a pre-decided rate, whenever the exchange rate appreciates, people will what people will do, they will buy dollars in the market and will sell this dollar to RBI to get rupees, because they will be paying 40 rupees to get $1 in the market, and will be selling the same dollar to RBI for 50 rupees and to make $10 rupees profit in the process. Now as RBI is giving money in exchange of dollars, the money supply in the economy increases, and the money supply will increase till the LM curve shifts to LM2, so that you are back to the pre-decided exchange rate, and only at the pre-decided exchange rate there is no further scope for arbitrage. But in the process, what has happened, because the money supply has increased, it has led to an increase in the GDP, because now we can see, so that fiscal policy is highly effective, because output is increasing from Y1 to Y2 in a fixed exchange rate system. Now if we consider monetary policy in a fixed exchange rate system, what is happening, this was my IS curve, this was IS1, and this was the LM curve. Now, if the central bank wants to increase money supply, the LM curve shifts to LM1, but now the exchange rate, suppose, was at the initially it was at the predefined exchange rate E1. Now because money supply has increased, the LM curve shifts to the right and the new exchange rate should be at E2. Now as the exchange rate has depreciated, what it will lead to, people will use their money to buy dollars from the central bank. That means more money is from the economy is now getting deposited with the central bank. In the process, money supply falls, people get dollars and they use these dollars to buy uh, they use these dollars to get rupees. They sell this dollar to get rupees, and how much they will get in the process, they will make a profit of 10 rupees in the process. If it was initially the pre-decided rate was 50 and the market exchange rate was 60. Now in the process, what has happened, as more money gets deposited back in the central bank, because it was profitable for arbitrageurs to do so, the LM curve, which had gone to the right, again moves back to the left, so that you are back to the same old level of GDP. So we are finding the monetary expansion puts downward pressure on the exchange rate. Now to prevent it from falling, the central bank remains committed to buy domestic currency in greater quantities to prop up the value of the currency in the foreign exchange market, and this Buying removes domestic currency from circulation, causing the money supply to fall, which shifts the LM curve back from LM1 to LM1, LM1 to LM. Now, let us, so what we are finding, monetary policy will be ineffective. Monetary policy is ineffective in influencing output in a fixed exchange rate system. Why? Because the central bank's commitment to keep the exchange rate or to exchange domestic currency for foreign currency at a predetermined level prompts arbitrageurs to deposit more money from circulation, take out more money from circulation and keep it with the RBI, and in the process reduce money supply because it was profitable to do so, and in the process when money supply goes down, the LM curve which had shifted to the right to LM1 again goes back to its previous position LM, and there is no change in output. So monetary policy is ineffective in influencing output, and this was monetary policy in a fixed exchange rate system. In fixed exchange rate system, okay. Now let us consider trade policy in a fixed exchange rate system. Now trade policy is leading to a restriction of imports. So this was my IS curve, curve, and this was the LM curve, and the restriction of imports lead to a increase in net exports, and so let it be IS1. Now that leads to a appreciation of the currency, but the commitment to the fixed exchange rate system causes the money supply to increase so that the LM curve shifts from LM to LM1, so output again increases. Okay, now this gain in or this increase in output has come at the expense of foreign countries. Why? Because different countries are trying to sell their products in the foreign in the foreign markets, but this country, the country in question, is using policy to keep the exchange rate, or the fixed exchange rate is used to keep the exchange rate at artificially lower level. So the exchange rate we should ideally have appreciated to from E1 to E2 is held back at E1 because of the central bank's commitment to the fixed exchange rate system, and this kind of policy is sometimes called the beggar thy neighbor policy. Why? Because you are growing or you are getting higher GDP at the cost of your neighboring countries, because they also want to cater to the foreign countries and they want to sell their product, but you are putting them at a disadvantage by keeping your exchange rate artificially low following a fiscal expansion, because your your monetary policy is working in tandem with fiscal policy to keep the exchange rate at a artificially lower level. So we had because the shift of the IS curve is leading to a increase in GDP because of the commitment of the central bank to the fixed exchange rate. We are finding trade policy is quite effective. Trade policy is effective in a fixed exchange rate system, which it was not under a flexible exchange rate system. I will discuss in the classroom a summary of the effectiveness of monetary and fiscal policy under different exchange rate systems. And the last thing that we will discuss is about what is known as the impossible trinity. Now, the impossible trinity tells that a country cannot get three things together. And what are the three things? One is it cannot have a independent monetary policy, an independent monetary policy. That means the central bank is having full control over what should be the money supply in the economy. Second, a fixed exchange rate system. That means the central bank remains committed to buy foreign currency for the domestic currency or sell domestic currency for foreign currency at a predefined rate. And third, uh, the capital flows, unhindered capital flows. What we are saying is these three things cannot coexist together, and this is known as the impossible trinity. And why this is known as the impossible trinity? You can appreciate that if a country is committed to a fixed exchange rate system and it is allowing capital flows, now you may find the currency will is appreciating, but you do not want that. Now uh, let us consider you are talking about a, a combination of capital flows and fixed exchange rate system. Now if I want to achieve a fixed exchange rate system, and while ensuring capital there is no restriction on capital flows, my exchange rate might have a tendency to appreciate. And if I am committed to a fixed exchange rate system, then I should be willing to change my money supply so as to achieve the fixed exchange rate system. So if I am going for fixed exchange rate system 2 and option 3, then I cannot have option 1. Now, if I am going for an independent monetary policy, that means I am changing money supply depending on the capital flows. Okay, when more capital flows come and when they needs to be exchanged with the domestic currency, my money supply changes accordingly. Then I cannot have a pre-decided exchange rate that can work. That means my exchange rate will be now market determined. It cannot be a fixed exchange rate system. So I cannot get point 2 if I am going for capital flows and a independent monetary policy. My um, my exchange rate will now become flexible. Now, if I am going for 1 and 2, if I want to have a fixed exchange rate system and an independent monetary policy, then I have to essentially restrict capital flows. I cannot allow the currency to be influenced by capital flows. So I cannot have 3 if I am going for option 1 and 2. Now, different countries adopt different combinations of these three policy options, and but when they go for 1 and 2, they have to give up policy option 3. If they go for 1 and 3, they have to give up policy option 2. If they go for 2 and 3, they have to give up policy option 1. And one classic example of um, a country following independent monetary policy and unhindered capital flows is US, because US doesn't intervene in the forex market. The exchange rate is influenced purely by the demand for and supply of dollars in the foreign currency market vis-a-vis other currencies. Now, if you talk about a country like China, what it is doing, it wants to keep the exchange rate at a pre-decided level, though they don't explicitly say it, but they intervene in the forex market to ensure that the exchange rate remains relatively low or relatively at a devalued level, so that they get the benefits of higher exports. And they also pursue an independent monetary policy. But then what becomes the casualty in the process is they have to, or they put restrictions on capital flows. So when I'm putting restriction on capital flows, a country like China describes this kind of a situation. And as far as some countries who give up their independent monetary policy and they try to link the money supply um, with what is happening in a foreign country, or they adopt a foreign currency as their domestic currency. That means they give up the independent monetary policy option. They go for a fixed exchange rate system coupled with capital flows. These are the Then this is a country like Hong Kong, who are pegging their currency to the dollar. That means they are following a fixed exchange rate system. They allow capital flows, but then the monetary policy just becomes a adjustment variable. They do not have control over what will be the money supply in the economy. We will discuss more about it in the classroom.